The celestial Voyager drifted silently through the darkness of deep space, its antimatter engines humming quietly as it carried humanity's first deep space research team beyond the solar system. Dr. Sarah Chen stood at the observation deck, her dark eyes fixed on the strange readings flickering across her neural interface. Something was wrong with the void ahead. Space itself seemed to bend and twist in ways that defied physics. "Captain Martinez, these readings don't make sense," she called out, her voice steady despite the growing unease in her stomach. "It's as if we're seeing quantum fluctuations on a macro scale." The captain, a veteran of Earth's Space Force with more hours in the void than anyone else alive, moved to her side. His weathered face creased with concern as he studied the data. "In 30 years of spaceflight, I've never seen anything like this. Edwards, full stop. Let's not blunder into whatever this is." But before the pilot could respond, the space around them erupted into brilliant, impossible colors. The ship's AI blared warnings as reality itself seemed to tear open, revealing a massive vessel unlike anything human eyes had ever witnessed. It was organic and geometric at once, its surface rippling with patterns that hurt to look at. "Multiple energy signatures detected," the AI announced calmly. "Ship configuration matches no known designs. Warning, we are being scanned." The alien vessel dwarfed the celestial Voyager, its hull gleaming with what appeared to be living metal. Before anyone could react, a beam of pure information struck their ship, downloading everything from their databases while simultaneously uploading vast amounts of alien data into their systems. Dr. Chen's neural interface exploded with information. Mathematical concepts that made her head spin, physics theories that contradicted everything she knew, and biology that defied understanding. But unlike her alien counterparts would have expected, her mind didn't break. Instead, it began to adapt, to reshape itself around the new concepts. "They're trying to communicate," she gasped, as patterns began forming in her mind, "but they're doing it wrong. They think we process information the same way they do." The alien vessel's response was immediate and devastating. Unable to comprehend how the humans were still conscious after the information transfer, they assumed their systems were malfunctioning. A second beam struck the ship, this one designed to temporarily paralyze any biological system it encountered. But humans, as the aliens were about to learn, didn't respond like other biological systems. Captain Martinez felt the beam's effect, a tingling sensation that should have shut down his nervous system. Instead, his body began adapting, his neurons firing in new patterns to compensate for the interference. Around the bridge, other crew members experienced similar phenomena, their bodies instinctively finding ways to function under the alien influence. "They're trying to disable us," Martinez announced, fighting through the disorientation. "But whatever they're using, our bodies are adapting to it." "Dr. Chen, can you make sense of any of this?" Sarah's mind raced through the alien data, her neural interface struggling to translate concepts that existed beyond human language. "They're the Symmetrians," she managed to say. They're terrified of us. Because we're changing in response to their attacks. According to their data, that should be impossible." The Symmetrians, as their name suggested, were beings of perfect order. Their civilization had evolved around principles of predictability and pattern, their technology based on absolute mathematical certainty. And now they faced something their models couldn't predict: human adaptability. As the crew of the celestial Voyager fought through the effects of the alien beam, their bodies and minds adapting in real time, the Symmetrians watched in horror. Every scan, every probe, every attempt to understand these strange beings only resulted in further adaptation. The humans were learning from each attack, their neural patterns shifting and evolving in ways that defied the fundamental laws of biology as the Symmetrians understood them. "They're pulling back," Edwards announced from the pilot's station, his voice strained but functional. "Whatever they were trying to do to us, I don't think they expected us to resist." Sarah's neural interface was now processing the alien data at unprecedented speeds, her brain forming new neural pathways to handle the influx of information. They've never encountered a species that could adapt like this. Their entire civilization is built on predictability, and we're anything but predictable. The massive alien vessel began to retreat, its surface rippling with patterns that Sarah now recognized as signs of extreme distress. The Symmetrians had encountered something they couldn't categorize, couldn't predict, and couldn't control. They had encountered humanity. As the alien ship disappeared into another tear in spacetime, Captain Martinez turned to his crew. "Status report. I want to know exactly what happened to each of us when that beam hit. Dr. Chen, start analyzing that data they uploaded. Whatever they were trying to do, they just gave us a treasure trove of their technology and knowledge." Sarah nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. "Captain, I don't think they meant to share so much with us. They assumed our brains would shut down from information overload. Instead, she gestured to her neural interface, which was still processing and adapting to the alien data. Instead, we're learning from it, adapting to it, using it. The crew of the Celestial Voyager had just demonstrated humanity's most terrifying quality, the ability to take the unknown, the hostile, the incomprehensible, and turn it into an advantage. As they began to analyze their encounter, none of them realized they had just initiated a chain of events that would forever change humanity's understanding of its own nature and its place in the universe. 3 months after the first contact incident, Dr. Sarah Chen awoke in a pristine white chamber that hurt her eyes with its perfect symmetry. The walls pulsed with living light, monitoring her every biological response. She wasn't alone. In identical chambers throughout the vast facility, 11 other crew members from the Celestial Voyager were undergoing similar observation. The Symmetrians had returned 2 weeks after their initial retreat, this time with a fleet of ships designed to contain and study the humans. The capture had been swift, clinical, and entirely predictable, exactly what the aliens preferred. What they hadn't predicted was how quickly their subjects would begin to comprehend their prison. Sarah pressed her hand against the wall, feeling the subtle vibrations of the monitoring systems. Over the past weeks, she had learned to interpret these vibrations as data streams, not because of any special training, but because her brain had simply adapted to recognize the patterns. The Symmetrians found this terrifying. "Subject Chen," a melodic voice echoed through the chamber. "You will now participate in today's cognitive assessment." The voice belonged to lead researcher Axum, a Symmetrian scientist whose crystalline form shifted between geometric patterns as they spoke. Sarah had noticed that certain patterns corresponded to specific emotional states, something the Symmetrians hadn't intended to reveal. A holographic interface materialized in the center of the chamber, displaying what appeared to be a complex mathematical puzzle. The Symmetrians had been presenting increasingly difficult challenges, measuring how the humans processed and solved problems. "Begin," Axiom commanded. Sarah studied the puzzle, but not in the way the Symmetrians expected. Instead of looking for the intended solution path, she saw multiple possibilities, including several that probably weren't meant to be valid approaches. This was what made humans so confounding to their captors. They didn't follow the expected routes to solutions. In an observation chamber above, Axiom conferred with their research team. "Subject Chen's neural patterns continue to defy our models," they noted, their crystalline form shifting to a pattern of concern angles. "Like the others, she creates new neural pathways for each challenge, rather than optimizing existing ones. It violates the third law of cognitive evolution," another researcher, designated Query, observed. "All sentient species we've encountered follow predictable optimization patterns. These humans, they seem to deliberately avoid optimization." Below, Sarah was solving the puzzle, but not in any way the Symmetrians had anticipated. She had discovered that the holographic interface responded to bioelectric fields, something her captors hadn't intended to be relevant. By modulating her own body's electrical field, a trick she'd learned by accident while trying to fall asleep, she could manipulate the puzzle in 3 additional dimensions. In the chamber next to hers, Captain Martinez was demonstrating equally confounding behavior. Given a puzzle designed to test pattern recognition, he had instead found a way to use the puzzle's energy field to communicate with other test subjects through subtle vibrations in the chamber walls. The Symmetrians watched in growing distress as their human subjects consistently failed to follow any predictable problem-solving patterns. Worse, they seemed to be learning from each failure, each mistake, each random attempt, incorporating these errors into new and increasingly effective approaches. They're networked. Axiom suddenly realized, their form shifting to a sharp-edged pattern of alarm. Not through technology, not through any detectable means, but they're somehow sharing information. The realization sent ripples of disturbance through the research team. The humans had been deliberately isolated, their chambers designed to prevent any form of communication. Yet somehow they were coordinating their responses, learning from each other's experiences, adapting as a group. Sarah felt the change in the vibrations around her. The Symmetrians were agitated. Good. She had learned that their emotional states affected their technology, subtle changes that human adaptability could detect and interpret. What the aliens saw as random neural noise was actually her brain processing and adapting to these minute variations. Subject Chen. Axiom's voice held a new tone, one that Sarah recognized as uncertainty. Explain how you are communicating with the other subjects. Sarah smiled, knowing the expression would disturb them with its asymmetry. We're human, she replied simply. Adaptation is what we do, even when we don't understand how we're doing it. The response sent another wave of disturbance through the observation chamber. The concept was alien to them. Adaptation without understanding, learning without optimization, progress through chaos rather than order. In their neighboring chambers, the other crew members continued their own forms of adaptation. Lieutenant Edwards had learned to dream in equations, his sleeping mind processing the Symmetrians' mathematical language. Dr. Patel had developed a form of synesthesia that let her see the facility's energy patterns as colors. Each human was evolving in unique, unpredictable ways. They must be contained, Query insisted, their form shifting to sharp angles of concern. Their chaos could infect our systems, disrupt our patterns. But Axiom, watching Sarah solve another impossible puzzle in another impossible way, was beginning to understand a terrible truth. Containment was an illusion. The humans weren't just adapting to their prison, they were transforming it, understanding it in ways its creators never had. As the day's tests concluded, Sarah lay back on her perfectly symmetrical bed, feeling the pulse of the facility around her. The Symmetrians thought they were studying humanity's capacity for adaptation. What they didn't realize was that this capacity had no limits, and their perfectly ordered world was about to learn just how terrifying true adaptability could be. The Symmetrian research facility's perfect order began to show its first cracks exactly 4 months after the humans' capture. It started with something so subtle that even the facility's hypersensitive monitoring systems almost missed it. Random fluctuations in the power grid, lasting mere microseconds. Axiom stood in the central control chamber, their crystalline form radiating patterns of deep distress as they studied the latest readings. The humans weren't just adapting anymore. They were changing the very environment around them. Impossible, Query insisted, their form shifting through agitated geometric patterns. The containment systems are perfect. The humans have no access to any controls. But perfection, as the Symmetrians were learning, meant nothing to human adaptability. In her chamber, Dr. Sarah Chen had discovered that her growing sensitivity to the facility's energy patterns wasn't just passive. Through careful experimentation, she had learned to influence these patterns with her own bioelectric field. And she wasn't the only one. Captain Martinez had developed what he called pressure points, specific locations in his chamber where the slightest touch could send ripples through the facility's neural network. Lieutenant Edwards had somehow taught himself to dream in the facility's base code, his sleeping mind reaching out to touch the building's quantum processors. The Symmetrians had made a critical mistake. They had assumed that isolation would prevent the humans from networking. Instead, it had forced them to develop entirely new ways of connecting, ways that bypass traditional communication entirely. Their neural patterns are becoming more erratic. A junior researcher reported, their form flickering with anxiety. The chaos in their thinking is increasing, but somehow their problem-solving efficiency is increasing with it. Axiom moved to study the neural maps displayed on the living walls. The human brains were indeed becoming more chaotic, forming connections that should have been impossible. Rather than optimizing their neural pathways as any sane species would, they were creating increasingly complex and unpredictable patterns. In her chamber, Sarah felt the growing tension in the facility's systems. The Symmetrians' perfect order was fighting against human chaos, and order was losing. She closed her eyes, reaching out with senses she hadn't possessed 4 months ago, feeling the pulse of the quantum processors that ran through the walls. Subject Chen. Axiom's voice carried a new tone, one that might have been fear in a less ordered being. Your latest test results are concerning. Your neural activity suggests you are operating multiple parallel thought processes, each following different logical frameworks. Sarah smiled. You know what humans call that. Tuesday. The attempted humor sent ripples of disturbance through the monitoring systems. The concept of random wordplay was deeply unsettling to the Symmetrians, yet another example of humanity's baffling tendency to introduce chaos into even basic communication. In the adjacent chambers, other crew members were pushing their own boundaries. Dr. Patel had developed what she called quantum empathy, an ability to sense and influence the quantum states of the facility's processors through emotional resonance. Ensign Zhang had learned to manipulate his own cellular structure in response to the containment field's attempts to suppress him. The Symmetrians watched in growing horror as their human subjects continued to evolve in ways that defied every known law of biology and physics. Each new adaptation spawned multiple others, creating a cascade of changes that threatened to overwhelm the facility's ability to monitor them. We must terminate the experiment, Query insisted, their form now showing patterns that hadn't been seen in Symmetrian society for millennia. Patterns of primal fear. These humans, they're not just adapting to our tests, they're adapting to existence itself. But Axiom had begun to understand a fundamental truth about their subjects. The humans weren't just surviving their captivity, they were thriving on it. Every restriction, every challenge, every attempt to contain them only pushed them to adapt further, to become more than they were. In her chamber, Sarah felt something new stirring in the facility systems, a resonance between the quantum processors and the evolved neural patterns of the human subjects. The Symmetrians had created their facility to be perfect, unchanging, eternal. But they had introduced an element of chaos, humanity. And chaos, by its nature, could not be contained. Remember, she whispered, knowing her fellow crew members would sense her words through the new connections they had formed. Humans don't just adapt to survive. We adapt because it's who we are. It's what we do. And right now, we're becoming something new. The facility's lights flickered, a microscopic disruption that would have been impossible in the Symmetrians' perfect system. But impossible had stopped meaning anything the moment they had tried to contain human adaptability within ordered walls. The breaking point wasn't approaching, it had already arrived. The only question was whether the Symmetrians would recognize it before their perfect order shattered completely against the force of human evolution. The perfect symmetry of the facility shattered at exactly 3:27 facility time, though by then the human subjects had developed several entirely new ways of measuring temporal flow. It began with a quantum cascade, a chain reaction that should have been impossible in the Symmetrians' perfectly ordered systems. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in her chamber, eyes closed, feeling the facility's neural networks pulse around her. The past 4 months had changed them all in ways that defied conventional understanding. They weren't just prisoners anymore. They had become something else, something that existed in the space between order and chaos. They're going to try to shut down the facility, she said, her words carrying through the quantum field to her fellow crew members. They think a complete reset will stop what's happening. Captain Martinez's response came not in words, but in patterns of thought that rippled through the facility's processors. The Symmetrians had wanted to study human adaptability. Now they would experience its full implications. In the control chamber, Axiom watched in horror as their perfect systems began to transform. The quantum processors, designed to maintain absolute order, were evolving, creating new pathways and connections that mirrored the chaos of human neural patterns. "Shut it down," Query commanded, their crystalline form displaying patterns of pure panic. "Terminate all systems." But the facility had stopped recognizing their authority. The humans hadn't just adapted to their prison. They had merged with it, their consciousness extending through its neural networks in ways the Symmetrians had never imagined possible. Sarah felt the shutdown command ripple through the system. Instead of fighting it, she embraced it, letting it flow through her evolved consciousness. The other humans did the same, their minds working in concert through the quantum field they had learned to access. The Symmetrians watched in disbelief as their shutdown command transformed into something else entirely. The humans had taken the ordnergy meant to reset the facility and reshaped it, turning the Symmetrians' perfect order against itself. Lieutenant Edwards, whose dreams had become one with the facility's base code, initiated the first phase. The containment fields, designed to suppress human chaos, inverted. Suddenly, it was order that was being contained, chaos that was being unleashed. Dr. Patel's quantum empathy spread through the facility's emotional recognition systems, creating feedback loops of human unpredictability that overwhelmed the Symmetrians' rigid cognitive patterns. The aliens reeled as their perfect understanding of reality began to crack. "What are you?" Axiom's voice carried genuine fear now, their perfect geometric form showing patterns that had never existed in their species' history. Sarah opened her eyes, which now held traces of quantum light. "We're human," she said simply. "We're what happens when you try to contain evolution itself." The chamber walls, once perfect in their symmetry, began to pulse with new patterns, organic, chaotic, alive. The humans had learned to speak the facility's language, but they spoke it with a grammar of chaos that defied the Symmetrians' understanding. Captain Martinez led the next phase, using the pressure points he had discovered to send waves of transformed energy through the facility's structure. The perfect geometries began to shift, responding to human thought patterns rather than Symmetrian commands. Ensign Zhang, who had learned to alter his cellular structure, demonstrated the full extent of human adaptation. His body briefly phased through the chamber wall, proving that the barriers between ordered space and chaos were far more permeable than the Symmetrians had believed. "The containment is failing." Query's voice resonated with frequencies of pure terror. "They're not escaping the facility. They're transforming it." They were right. The humans hadn't just found a way out of their prison. They had changed the very nature of their confinement. The facility, designed to be a perfect expression of order, had become a hybrid of Symmetrian technology and human chaos. Sarah stepped through her chamber wall, her evolved consciousness extending through the facility's networks. Around her, other crew members emerged from their chambers, each displaying new abilities that blended human unpredictability with Symmetrian quantum technology. The Symmetrians backed away, their perfect forms showing patterns of distress that rippled through the quantum field. They had sought to understand human adaptability by containing it, studying it, measuring it against their standards of perfect order. Instead, they had created something unprecedented, beings who existed in both order and chaos, who could speak to quantum processors through dreams and emotions, who had turned containment into transformation. "You should have let us go," Sarah said, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated with the facility's quantum core. "Instead, you taught us how to become something new, something that isn't just human anymore, but isn't Symmetrian either." The facility's lights pulsed with patterns that mirrored human neural activity. The perfect prison had become a cocoon, and what had emerged was neither what the Symmetrians had intended to create nor what humanity had been before. The escape wasn't just physical, it was evolutionary. And as the transformed humans stepped into their new existence, the Symmetrians faced a terrifying reality. In trying to understand human adaptability, they had unleashed something that would change both species forever. The Symmetrian High Council gathered in their grand chamber, its perfect geometric architecture now seeming somehow fragile in the wake of recent events. The escaped humans had left more than just a transformed research facility behind. They had shattered the very foundation of symmetry and understanding of the universe. Axiom stood before the council, their crystalline form showing patterns that reflected both fear and fascination. The data from the human experimentation scrolled through the quantum displays, each reading more impossible than the last. What we discovered about humans, Axiom began, their voice resonating through the quantum field, is that we fundamentally misunderstood what they are. We thought they were like other biological species, following predictable patterns of evolution and adaptation. We were wrong. The council chamber's displays showed the neural patterns of the human subjects, recorded over their months of captivity. What had started as recognizable biological processes had evolved into something that defied conventional science. Humans, Axiom continued, are not the product of standard evolution. They are evolution itself, personified. They are chaos given consciousness, change given purpose. Sarah Chen and her fellow crew members, now aboard a hybrid vessel that combined symmetry and quantum technology with human unpredictability, monitored the council meeting through their evolved quantum awareness. Their escape hadn't been the end. It had been a beginning. Every species we've encountered, Axiom explained, evolves toward optimization. They find their niche, their perfect adaptation, and they settle into it. Humans do the opposite. They deliberately seek out new challenges, new environments, new ways of being. They don't evolve to fit their environment. They evolve to change it. The council chamber filled with patterns of distress as Axiom displayed the final data from the facility. It showed how the human subjects had not only adapted to their containment, but had fundamentally altered the nature of space-time within their chambers. We thought we were studying them, but they were transforming us. Our perfect order, our predictable patterns, they became the catalyst for human evolution. And now, Axiom's form shifted to display entirely new patterns. Now they've shown us what we never wanted to see, that the universe isn't meant to be ordered. Sarah felt the ripples of revelation spreading through the quantum field. The Symmetrians were beginning to understand what humanity had always instinctively known. That chaos wasn't the enemy of evolution. It was its driving force. Captain Martinez, his consciousness now able to extend through quantum space, shared a thought with his crew. They wanted to know why we're different. They're finally seeing it. We're different because we never stopped changing. The High Council's perfect chamber seemed to shimmer as the implications of Axiom's report sank in. The humans hadn't just escaped their containment. They had evolved beyond the very concept of containment. They had become beings who could exist in both order and chaos, who could reshape reality through the power of pure adaptation. The question we should ask, Axiom concluded, is not what humans are, but what they will become. They are evolution's wild card, a species that treats the impossible as a challenge rather than a limit. In their hybrid vessel, the transformed crew of the celestial Voyager felt the quantum ripples of understanding spread through Symmetrian civilization. Their captivity had changed them, yes, but it had also changed the Symmetrians. Order and chaos had met, and neither would ever be the same. They're afraid, Dr. Patel observed, her quantum empathy sensing the emotional currents flowing through space, not just of us, but of what we represent. They should be, Sarah replied, watching as new patterns formed in the quantum field around them. We've shown them that their perfect order isn't the universe's natural state. Change is. Adaptation is. Chaos is. The Symmetrian High Council reached a decision that would forever alter their civilization's course. They would not attempt to contain or control humanity. Instead, they would study them from afar, watching as these creatures of chaos continued their endless evolution. As the hybrid vessel prepared to return to Earth, Sarah felt the quantum field pulse with possibilities. Humanity had been unleashed not just from physical containment, but from the limitations of conventional evolution. They were becoming something new with each passing moment, each adaptation leading to a dozen more. "We're bringing back more than just technology," Captain Martins said, his thoughts resonating through the ship's quantum core. "We're bringing back the truth about what humanity really is." The truth was both beautiful and terrifying. Humans weren't just another species in the cosmic dance of evolution. They were the wild card, the chaos factor, the element that could never be predicted or contained. They were living proof that the universe wasn't meant to be ordered. It was meant to change. As their vessel slipped through quantum space, carrying them back to a home they would see with new eyes, Sarah realized that their transformation wasn't complete. It would never be complete. That was the gift and the curse of being human, the endless drive to become something more, something different, something new. The Symmetrians had sought to understand human nature. Instead, they had unleashed it, not just upon themselves, but upon the universe. And the universe, in all its chaotic glory, would never be the same.